All right, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure having you and getting this opportunity to speak with you.
Well, it's great to be with you, and I always appreciate a chance to talk about my work and career and the work of the Multistate Tax Commission.
Love that. And so, can you share your journey into state and local tax and the career path that led you to the MTC?
Sure. So when I was entering law school, I had just finished a master's in business administration. So I had taken some tax courses as part of that. My undergraduate degree is in psychology, but I also had taken some business classes. And I was aware of taxes just because my dad was a CPA in a small Midwestern town, and was used to not seeing him for weeks and months on end during tax season when he was doing returns for his clients. But admittedly, when I entered law school, I did not know anything about state and local tax. I took federal income tax. I took at least one other tax class, but I don't recall the University of Texas at that time having any SALT classes. So that was not on my radar. But I started clerking at the Texas Attorney General's office in what's called the Taxation Division. And those are the attorneys who represent the state comptroller, which is the Texas agency charged with administering state taxes. And so they would do the litigation and appellate work when there were disputes over the meaning of a statute or its constitutionality, and whether or not the comptroller had the proper interpretation and legal interpretation of these laws. So I moved into an attorney position after I got my bar results and spent roughly the next 6 years working there, doing mainly sales and use tax cases, some franchise tax cases, franchise tax being the main business tax in Texas, now referred to commonly as the margins tax. I was reminiscing about my career getting ready to do this, and recalling that the one group of cases that I inherited when I moved into an attorney role were the controlled substances taxes, the drug tax that existed at that time. And the first appellate argument I ever did 6 months after getting my bar license and starting to do tax cases was a Court of Appeals case concerning the Texas drug tax at that time. So, but it was a great 6+ years. I had some wonderful mentors, people who really knew Texas tax, were just superb trial attorneys and appellate specialists. One of the things about the Attorney General's office at that time in my early part of my career was the attorneys who handled the case at trial typically would get to handle the case at the appellate level as well. There was not a Solicitor General's office like there is today. So from a very young age of being an attorney, I had a lot of autonomy in the cases that I handled, a lot of responsibility to work them up, work with the people in the comptroller's office to understand the issues, and then, handle them at trial and at the appellate level. And, typically with these tax cases, they're business related cases. And if they're in court, it's because they're questions of first impression. If they've been answered, there's no reason for them to be litigated. And I realize in hindsight, I didn't really appreciate how these cases were questions of first impression that might impact the jurisprudence of the state of Texas. And of course, not just that individual taxpayer, but many taxpayers as well, and just the dollars involved could be much greater than the specific amount in controversy. So it was a great experience and a great opening to being a SALT attorney. Like I said, I was there for a little over 6 years. And then I left for a short period of time. My husband's work presented us with an opportunity to live in Europe. So I had an interesting moment where it was kind of this question. I could stay in Texas at the Attorney General's office litigating tax cases or my husband and I and the dog and the cat could go to Europe. And so I made the decision to go to Europe for a while. but then came back and joined a large law firm doing state and local tax, representing people before the Texas Comptroller's office. So I got the flip side of the experience, not so much litigation, but just having to work with the Comptroller's office, and there were people that I had relationships with that I had developed during the years I was in the control or in the Attorney General's office. Those continued, or others developed while I was with the law firm and handling matters before the Comptroller's office. So about 10 years in, I left the law firm and then had an opportunity to go into the Comptroller's office. And that just seemed like a good fit at the time when I kind of took stock of what I had done so far in terms of SALT work, representing clients, representing the Comptroller's office. But what I realized, one of the things I really enjoyed was the aspect of policy, and rather than defending it, I had an opportunity to actually help make it and impact the SALT world from that perspective, and that was very attractive. So I went into the Comptroller's office in 2004 as basically a frontline policy analyst, and just continued there for almost 16 years and had just a lot of really great opportunities. Some that I asked for, others that I was asked to take roles to step into along the way, but just a gradual progression of learning more in terms of tax policy, tax administration, legislation, continuing to do support for litigation, the attorneys, whether they were in the administrative hearing section or at the Attorney General's office, to support litigation on that front. But just a really great opportunity to see a bigger picture of state and local tax along the way. So that's a little bit about how I've gotten to where I am today at the MTC.
Yeah, so you would have been at the comptroller's office when the margins tax went into was enacted, and there was that shift. What was that like? Or how were those conversations?
So again, you're absolutely right. So again, I joined the Comptroller's office in 2004, and by the time July of 2006, I had moved into the role of tax policy area manager, and so that was the group of attorneys and others who developed rules, were the main rule writers in the policy area. And you're absolutely right. The I still call it the franchise tax, but I know a lot of people call it the
I
margins
do
tax.
too.
I'm sorry, it's just still like fingernails on a chalkboard for me. When people say the margins tax, I'm like, there's no such thing as the margins tax. It's the franchise tax. But anyway, when the franchise tax, changed on it to the margin calculation, I was managing that group of all the policy folks, including the franchise tax group. And one of the key things I remember from that time was how critical it was to develop the rules to get things out and in a timely manner, so that people knew how to comply with this brand new calculation. There was a team at that time of 4 or 5 franchise tax experts, thank goodness, people that had been there for a while, and along with William Hamner, who's still involved at the work at the commission. But it really, I was not directly involved, but again, I was managing that team, and they just really rose to the occasion as I think back to that time. Not only working on the rules and all the other internal aspects of tax administration that had to get developed in terms of the systems and forms and that kind of thing, but all of the different trainings that were done. I remember that team of analysts, Janet Spees and Teresa Bostic, and some of those folks that went all over the state doing seminars and trainings to help taxpayers and practitioners understand how the controller's office was going to administer this very major shift in one of the major taxes. So it was an interesting place to be at the time. And of course, it's been interesting to see how those issues have gotten litigated over the years, as far as how the controller's interpretation of the statutory language has developed over time, and the changes that the legislature has continued to make to tinker with that part of Texas law. But yeah, interesting that you asked me that question, because it does bring back memories of, again, as I think about it, just what a terrific team effort it was internally, but also, like so much of what is good about good tax administration, really bringing in the perspectives of all the stakeholders to make sure you're listening to what other people are thinking about, and whenever possible to try and get on the same page as far as what the policy is going to be, why, and how everybody can move forward together.
Yeah, because I really remember, I mean, I was a senior, I think, in Big Four, reading the rules, trying to be like, okay, well, we have this giant taxpayer. First off, here are our new unitary rules, right? And the ownership, and what does our group look like? And then going into, okay, well, what is our revenue structure? And then again, reading the rules and the direct references to the federal return. And so I feel like that, was one of kind of the biggest pieces of legislative change that I learned as a little baby senior, because it was a whole shift where everyone was learning from scratch because no one knew what they were doing, right? So it was kind of a cool, kind of from a practitioner standpoint, point of teaming as well, because you're like, okay, well, here's how we read the rules. Here's how it's going to apply. What does this mean? Um, and so I specifically remember that, and like putting together our work papers of how we're going to calculate it and get it onto the return. And I'm still using those work papers 15 years later, right? So it's just, yeah, just hearing that teaming effort from the comptroller side and seeing, because that's the exact same thing that we did on the practitioner side. Um,
Yeah, like you said, everybody was scrambling to figure out how this was going to work. And as you mentioned, combined reporting came on the scene. You think about in other states how, that's still, out there for some states yet to perhaps go to combined reporting.
mhm.
But, some states that have done it, it's taken multiple times and tries at the legislative level. And here, kind of out of the blue, it just got stuck in there. And nobody inside the agency had much exposure to it. And that's one thing I remember. We brought the Multistate Tax Commission in to do training for the auditors and policy folks to understand how to think about auditing and thinking about combined returns and unitary. And I still marvel that in all these years Texas has had no cases on that issue. Somehow we seem to have navigated through those unitary issues in a way that I guess between the rules and policy and how things have been audited, we haven't had any litigation disputes on that after all these years.
Yeah. Well, so then I will say, what then motivated you to go from the comptroller's office to the MTC?
So again, going back to when I became tax policy area manager in the agency in 2006, the person whose position I took, I answered to her before I moved into that role, and I knew there were these meetings she would go to every once in a while, every few months, and she'd be on certain phone calls every once in a while, talking about these tax issues. Not realizing that was the Multistate Tax Commission that she was going and attending. And when I moved into her role, I was told, okay, you now need to attend meetings of the Multistate Tax Commission. And I didn't really understand. Nobody really sat me down and told me much about what it was and how it worked, but they said you needed to go. So I said, okay. And so my first MTC meetings, I remember this, were in the summer of 2006 in Topeka, Kansas, and off I went. I didn't know a soul. I had never, and I was told go to the uniformity committee meetings and go to the executive committee meetings. And so I, walk into this room of people at this uniformity committee, and just was trying to get my bearings about which end is up. I went to the executive committee meeting, and I just sat like at the back of the room, just thinking I needed to just sit and observe and kind of monitor what was going on and report. Then somebody came and got me, and they said, no, Nancy, you need to sit at the table. And there's like this little table tent there for Texas. And
I
it
was
was
like,
like,
"You're
no,
Texas. You need
you're
to be here.
Texas. And
You're
I was
number
like,
what? 2,
I
3,
am.
top
Yeah.
5?"
And,
Like,
and after going to a couple of these in-person meetings, I finally was started again figuring this out. And then one day it finally pinged in my brain that these other people sitting around this table at the executive committee meeting, like, were the heads of their departments of revenue. They were like the Texas, comptroller of public accounts. And here I was, truly a low level policy manager in the agency. But as I have said many times now, that door that opened with the MTC was such a wonderful part of my career with the controller's office, because of the people that I got to meet across the country and other departments of revenue, the issues that I was exposed to about multi-state, income, sales and use tax issues, but also, yeah, that wonderful opportunity to sit there representing Texas at the executive committee, and having the opportunity to have as role models some of these really wonderful tax administrators. Not that I didn't have good role models at the controller's office, but it was just, another group of people who were very devoted to this area of law, and really trying hard to get it right and do things well. And so again, my career at the controller's office was very fortunate. And when I again entered as a frontline policy analyst, I had no aspirations to move into any particular role in the agency, and let alone to move eventually into the role of general counsel, which is the last position that I held. But in that role, I was moving further and further away from doing state and local tax work. And at that point, there really wasn't any place else for me to go at the agency. But I was at an MTC meeting in the fall of 2019, where they announced that then General Counsel Helen Hecht was going to be moving into this new role of uniformity counsel. So they would be going to look for a new general counsel. And I remember hearing that, and this voice in my head just said, Nancy, that might be your next job. And so I just decided, I've loved being a SALT attorney. I've missed doing as much tax work as I had done before. I knew the MTC, I knew what it was about, and I just saw it as a great opportunity to go to another level in my career as far as a more multi-state, national exposure. And so I just decided I needed to throw my hat in the ring and apply. I would never, forgive myself if I didn't just try. And so I was very gratified to have gone through that process and been asked to become general counsel. And so, now I'm one of 8 attorneys on our legal team. And it's been the positive experience I had hoped for, to really continue to grow in my knowledge and experience as a SALT attorney. But at this level, where I'm at this fairly small organization, but boy, do we have a big imprint and footprint across the country. And it's just, again, very gratifying, just like it was when I was at the controller's office, to have those opportunities to identify what is best about state tax administration, and really try and bring that to the fore whenever possible, so that, as I like to say, at its best, we're going to increase certainty and clarity, and we're going to decrease risk and disputes, and try and find that common ground with all stakeholders having that opportunity to weigh in through the process.
yeah, and I want to spent some time talking about the MTC, but as you were talking and kind of thinking about what it's like to walk into a room of kind of, right, potentially the heads of the Department of Revenue, but as Texas, right? It's kind of a silly question, but did any of kind of your cohorts when you would go to those MTC meetings ever give you all a hard time about like, come on, Texas, why'd you do that? Now we have to did you ever have to take one for for the state of Texas at any one state? You don't have to call them out by name.
No,
Give
no.
you a hard time.
I don't remember any time, and I think, but though I must say, I did become mindful as I learned more about the commission and just again working on a multi-state level that Texas had a pretty big footprint across the country, and and that's one of those things. Just even now, I find myself saying for a state and local tax attorney, when you work in a Department of Revenue in a state like Texas, which at the time we would say, it was like in my later part of my career there, Texas was like had the 11th largest economy on the planet. Then it was the 10th. I looked it up recently for another purpose. Now they're saying, it's the ninth largest economy on the planet. So as I advanced through the agency and had more of a kind of global perspective on the agency itself and our work, it really dawned on me more and more that decisions that were made in terms of tax policy did not just affect Texas, obviously, but really did impact the world because so many people were doing business in Texas. And but to your point, as far as with other states, I did try and stay, humble. I mean, we had an impact, but it did not at all diminish the camaraderie with my other folks from the other departments of revenue. And the other thing that I remember from that was really wonderful was, there were times when Texas, in terms of tax policy, would actually be aligned with other states that you might not necessarily think politically. And in particular, I think about back in the 2010, 13 area where at the federal level, the Marketplace Fairness Act was being looked at as a possible way for the states to get that remote seller access or access to having remote sellers collect and remit without a physical uh, uh, presence in a state, and that federal bill, which of course did not ultimately pass, but it was kind of setting up this dichotomy between the streamlined states and the non-streamlined states, which of course Texas is a non-streamlined state, and so it was this interesting connection between Texas and other big states like California, New York, Illinois, and Florida, which again politically to
Certainly
some
in
extent we're on
2024.
different yeah today, but back then as a matter of policy, though, as tax administrators, we had a common interest on behalf of our states that we wanted to make sure if there was going to be federal legislation that we would be able to withstand whatever Congress was going to send our way. And so it was just interesting to work on that issue, for example, and work with other states on a tax policy basis that you might not think otherwise. So, and to me, that's always been one of the great things about working in tax administration. Even now, we don't look at ourselves as red state tax administrators, blue state tax administrators. We're just all tax administrators. So we're just trying to get it right and do the best we can. So so that your question brings to mind that kind of memory as well.
So Nancy, I think you and I had met at a ABA meeting, I don't know, sometime last year or so. And I do remember that conversation that you had asked me about, like, hey, if you have anything that, any taxpayer concerns, I'd love to hear it. That was that made a big impression on me just because I was like, I love hearing government say, we want to hear, all the things that taxpayers struggle with or have issue with. And so, I mean, I'm from Texas. I don't know if you remember, but so I'm in the
Yes.
big state of Texas. And I mean,
Yes.
the whole process where the rulemaking and, making it public and, the commentary period. I don't I mean, I think other states have kind of similar process, but I feel like in Texas we do a great job, and me touting Texas, but I mean, truly, that process of getting all perspectives before a decision is made is super powerful. So I guess I felt like when we had that initial conversation, I had that same feeling. So I just kind of wanted
Well,
to
thank
echo
you for
that.
sharing that, because it really is true, and I mean I really do carry that, and that's a hallmark, I think, of the agency. As you say, about with like rule making, and I worked on many rules during the time I was with the controller's office, and in fact it was actually one of the favorite parts of my job. I really loved rule writing, which you would think, I mean, that's like the ultimate tax nerd kind of thing to say, but and
You're
I
among
but
your people
it,
here.
Yes.
yeah, but it was always very gratifying. But that was one of the things that we did, and I hope other state departments of revenue may do this in some way, shape, or form. But had a very robust taxpayer advisory group and business advisory group, and with the rulemaking, before we ever sent rules to the Secretary of State's office for formal noticing and the formal required legal 30-day comment period, we always sent those to the taxpayer advisory group and business advisory group to ask for their input, and I that was always very welcome. I mean, it was a great way to collaborate, make sure that we weren't missing something. There was lots of times the taxpayer community would suggest language that would make it better, and we were happy to have that. And so yeah, I think that Texas still does a great job with that, but it's also a fun part and a meaningful part of being with the Multistate Tax Commission, that as a governmental entity, which I know that's always a strange thing to people, that the MTC is government, but we do have that very robust public participation policy and that same commitment to a transparent process whenever we're working on uniformity projects, model rules, what have you. It's just, and even if we can't agree that there's that this is the right way to do it, or there's differences of opinions, or just flat out disagreement that the MTC should even be doing something, we know that exists as well from time to time. It's still very much welcome to know that, and to hear those voices, and make sure again we get it as right as we possibly can.
Well, I think that's something wonderful about the kind of state and local tax community, right? Is there are so many nuances, so many kind of different taxes that one state can be responsible for administering, so that it's impossible to be an expert in all 50 states on all of the possible tax types. So by default, if you want to be good at your job or care about your job as a state and local tax practitioner, you know, interested party, you have to operate in a spirit of collaboration, because it's impossible to know it all and do it all, right? And so that's something that we always kind of, when we talk about as a team, just how, it's just something that really resonates with our team, is just always that spirit of collaboration and partnering and just getting to know who else is out there, what everyone else is suffering with, because also just a lot of things happen behind closed doors that you're not privy to. And so it's nice to be able to have a community to share with and be a part
Yeah,
of.
and that's one of those things, as I get the opportunity to talk to young attorneys and such, which is one of the things I love to do now that I'm the kind of the old guard, the old lady in the SALT world after 30 years. That's one thing I always tell them, that whether it's been in the Texas community that I was part of, or now even at the national level, that is one thing about tax attorneys in general, and that I have found. It's just a wonderful group of people. And you're absolutely right about, at the SALT level, when, like you said, Tram, you go to the ABA meetings, there's just this great sense that I will be better if I share my knowledge with you, and it's not going to hurt me in terms of, if I'm, at some level, everybody's a competitor, in the private sector, everybody's wanting clients, but at the same time, everybody benefits from people being fully informed and being able to give accurate information and share those experiences and all try and get better together. Yeah, that is definitely one of the things that I've experienced in my career as well, and just the reality that there are people that will work in the public sector as well as the private sector at some points in their career, which I always want to make sure and make a plug out there for whoever might be listening to this, if they're law students or people earlier in their career. Just want to say what a great experience obviously I've had being more of a public sector SALT attorney. You really have it's really beneficial if you can work in the agency for any period of time to really understand how the processes work, how people think, those relationships that you can build with people, because that too is something that's really important. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, and if you can build that level of trust with somebody, if you're in the agency and when a certain practitioner comes to you and tells you, hey, I've got this client, I've got this situation, if they've been honest with you in the past and worked well with you, I mean, that just inures to everybody's benefit to have those relationships as well. So yeah, it's that too, like you say, it's been a wonderful part of my career to just have wonderful working relationships with people I meet, whether they're technically my adversaries or from my litigation days, or even now with at times may see differences in terms of what policy should be, or how to interpret something, but we can still have a really wonderful relationship and get along and share with each other.